Welcome to Terrifying Creepy Stories, the place where the dark corners of forgotten places come alive through bone-chilling true tales. If you're new here, I'm glad you found us. And to my loyal subscribers, thank you for always returning to the shadows with me. Before we dive into tonight's haunting story, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next terrifying upload. And tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I love seeing how far these creepy stories travel. Now, turn the lights down, and let's begin. I was staying at a small inn in Vermont last October. It wasn't anything fancy, just a 4-room bed and breakfast owned by this elderly couple who lived downstairs. I was driving up the East Coast to clear my head after a rough breakup, and the inn had popped up on some last-minute booking site. The pictures showed warm, dim lighting, lots of wood paneling, and breakfast served in a sunroom overlooking a forest. It looked peaceful. When I pulled in just before dusk, the place looked a little more worn than the photos let on. The shutters were crooked, the siding needed painting, and one of the porch steps bowed under my weight. Still, I wasn't expecting the Ritz. The older woman who checked me in, her name was Lorraine, was polite but stiff. Her husband, I think his name was Arthur, hovered in the background. He didn't say much, just gave me a tight smile and a nod. Lorraine led me up to the second floor and showed me to my room. It was small but cozy, one double bed, a rocking chair in the corner, and a dresser with an antique mirror that had this weird smudge right in the center like someone had pressed their forehead to it. The shared bathroom was at the end of the hall. She mentioned it like it was an afterthought. "Bathroom's down there. Please keep it clean. And no visitors after 9. I remember thinking it was an odd rule, but I nodded. I wasn't planning on having any guests, anyway. That first night was quiet. I dozed off watching something on my laptop. The room had that kind of silence that you only find in old country houses, thick and heavy, like even the air had weight. I kept waking up though. Not because of noise, but because of the lack of it. My ears were straining for sound. I kept thinking I'd heard footsteps out in the hallway, or the creak of the rocking chair even though I hadn't sat in it. But every time I opened my eyes, there was nothing. Just that stillness. Around 2:30 a.m., I woke up needing to pee. Badly. I lay there for a few minutes, hoping it would pass, but it only got worse. The kind of pressure you can't ignore. I sat up, slipped on my socks, and grabbed my phone to use as a flashlight. The hallway light was off, and I didn't want to fumble around for a switch. The second floor hallway was long and narrow, with creaky floorboards and faded wallpaper that was probably floral once but now looked like rust stains. The bathroom door was on the left, near the end. The closer I got, the colder the air felt. Not freezing, just stale. Like the air hadn't moved in years. I turned the knob and pushed the door open quietly. What I saw made me freeze. There was someone already in there. A man. He was crouched low to the ground near the tub. Not sitting, not standing, just this awkward squatting position. His back was to me at first, but as the door creaked open, he turned. That's when I saw what he was wearing. A mime costume. Full on. White face paint, black lips stretched into a smile. Black suspenders, white gloves, even the little beret. He looked like someone you'd see in a street performance, except he was indoors, alone, in a dimly lit guest bathroom of a country inn in the middle of the night. And his pants were up. He just held that pose, still squatting, and then slowly, so slowly, lifted one gloved hand and gave me this tiny wave. Then he smiled, wide, but didn't say a word. I didn't move. I didn't say anything. My mind was racing to catch up with what I was seeing. Was he doing a bit? Was this some bizarre prank? Was he a guest? Why the costume? I cleared my throat and said, Are you okay, man?" No answer. Just that same exaggerated smile and a sudden shift. He started pretending to push. Like he was straining to go to the bathroom. His face scrunched up, comically exaggerated, but he was dead silent the whole time. I felt something primal rise up in me, something in my brain that told me this wasn't a joke. Something was off. Deeply off. I took a step back and shut the door quietly. I didn't run, I walked. Very calmly, all the way back to my room. Locked the door. Wedged the desk chair under the knob. And just stood there for a moment in the dark, my heart thumping hard enough to hurt. I didn't go back out that night. I ended up peeing in an empty water bottle I found in my backpack. I barely slept. Every creak of the hallway floor had me sitting up, listening. I didn't hear any other doors open. No one walked past. It was like the whole house had frozen. The next morning, at breakfast, I brought it up, cautiously. Lorraine was serving toast and eggs, and there was one other guest. A man in his 40s, traveling for work? I asked. Hey, did you guys see someone dressed up last night? Like a mime? Lorraine frowned. A what? A mime. Face paint costume. In the bathroom around 2-something. She looked at Arthur, who looked at me and then said, No one like that here. The other guest shook his head. I was asleep by 10. Didn't hear a thing. I asked if maybe there had been a costume party in town, or if one of the guests was into performance art. Lorraine's voice got colder. We don't allow costumes, or guests who disturb the peace. I didn't push it, but I checked out that afternoon instead of staying the extra night I'd planned. I haven't told many people about it because I still don't know what I saw. I was tired, sure, but not hallucinating. And the memory is too sharp to dismiss. The mime wasn't threatening. He didn't move toward me or try anything. But that silence, that intentional silence. And the way he looked at me like he wanted me to see him. That still creeps me out. I sometimes wonder if I'd walked into something I wasn't supposed to see. A ritual. A performance. Or something stranger than either. All I know is, if you're ever staying somewhere with a shared bathroom, and the hallway feels a little too quiet at night, maybe just wait till morning. I stayed in a boutique hotel on the coast of Northern California last summer. It was supposed to be a quiet, solo vacation, a reset after months of burnout from work. I'd booked a week at a place called the Cliffside Inn, nestled on a bluff overlooking the Pacific. It wasn't a big hotel, only about a dozen rooms, marketed as luxury meets seclusion. The building had this rustic charm, all dark wood and ivy, with an old brass elevator that groaned when it moved. The staff was polite but distant, which honestly suited me fine. I wasn't looking to make small talk. I just wanted to sleep in, read by the ocean, and maybe pretend for a few days that I wasn't completely unraveling. The first few nights were peaceful. I'd come back to my room around sunset, order a late dinner, and leave the sliding doors cracked open to let in the sound of the waves. I slept better than I had in months, until night 4. It started around 3:15 in the morning. I jolted awake, heart pounding, unsure why. Then I heard it, the unmistakable rattle of my doorknob. Fast. Aggressive. Someone was either trying to get in or didn't realize they were at the wrong room. I sat up and listened, holding my breath. The handle jerked again. Then again. I shouted, "Hey, wrong room!" But the moment I made noise, it stopped. Total silence. I sat there for a minute, waiting. Eventually, I got up, opened the door cautiously, and peeked into the hallway. Empty. I wrote it off as a drunk guest or maybe a kid messing around. It's a hotel, right? Weird things happen. But the next night, the same thing happened. This time it was louder. More erratic. The doorknob wasn't just rattling. It was slamming back and forth. My heart raced as I lay frozen, the sound echoing through the dark room like someone trying to bust in. Again, as soon as I stirred, dead silence. I crept to the peephole. No one there. That's when it stopped feeling like a fluke. The next morning, I asked the front desk if there had been any security issues. The young guy behind the counter gave me a blank look and said no, but I could tell he was lying. His eyes shifted, and he didn't ask any questions. Just kind of nodded like he'd heard it before. I pressed a little harder, and that's when the manager came out, an older man named Jeff. Polished. Friendly. A little too composed. He pulled me aside and lowered his voice. "Look," he said. "There's someone staying on the 3rd floor, family member of a longtime client. He's had a difficult past. Recently released from a mental health facility. Sometimes he forgets where he is at night. Especially if he's missed his meds." I just stared at him. "He's trying to get into people's rooms. He sleepwalks. It's disorienting for him. Thinks he's still locked up. Sometimes he tries doors at random, thinking one will open. We're monitoring him. He hasn't hurt anyone." I asked why he was still allowed to stay. Jeff hesitated. "His family, they're connected. We're trying to be sensitive. His father's a major investor in several hospitality chains." I was floored. "So you're risking guest safety because you don't want to upset a rich client?" Jeff gave a tired sigh. "It's a temporary situation. He's here under supervision. It should stop soon." I left the lobby feeling nauseous. That night, I pushed a chair under the doorknob and didn't sleep. It got worse. By night 6, the door wasn't just rattling. Something was slamming into it. Hard. Like a shoulder. Boom. 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 I grabbed my phone and called the front desk, but no one answered. It stopped again the moment I turned on a light. The hallway was empty. No sounds. No footsteps walking away. But the next morning I saw it. A faint scuff mark at the base of my door. Like a rubber sole had kicked it, over and over. I checked out 2 days early. As I was loading my bag into my car, I saw him. At least I think I did. A man on the 3rd floor balcony, just standing there. Mid-30s, pale, wearing pajama pants and a t-shirt. Barefoot. Blank face. He wasn't looking at the view. He was looking at me. And as I backed out of the parking lot, I saw him raise his hand and gently twist an invisible knob in the air, over and over, as if rehearsing. Just like he'd been doing all night. It was during a backpacking trip through Southeast Asia that I found myself in Yangon, Myanmar. I hadn't planned on staying long, maybe 2 or 3 nights, but after almost 2 weeks on the road, I was craving a quiet bed and a real shower. I had just come off a 14-hour bus ride from Bagan. Dust still clung to my clothes. My legs were stiff, and my backpack felt twice as heavy as it should have been. I didn't have a hotel booked, just figured I'd find something once I got there. The cab I flagged outside the bus station was barely holding itself together. The inside smelled like engine grease and cigarette smoke. I remember the dashboard was cracked down the center, and the driver had a small porcelain Buddha zip tied to the air vent. I told him I needed somewhere cheap but clean. He nodded once, muttered something in Burmese, and pulled out into the narrow, chaotic streets. Yangon is a strange blend of old and older. Crumbled colonial buildings, tangled wires sagging between poles, and storefronts that felt like they hadn't been cleaned since the 80s. I wasn't expecting luxury. I just wanted somewhere with air conditioning and maybe a door that locked. We pulled up to a 6-story building with faded green paint and a hand-painted wooden sign above the door that read, Lotus Garden Inn. There were potted plants near the entrance, and a dim reception desk behind a wire mesh window. The driver turned and said, "Cheap. Okay place." Then he drove off without waiting for payment. I took that as a good sign, weirdly. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of mothballs and lemon cleaner. A middle-aged man in a pale blue button-up greeted me in broken English and told me the price was just 10,000 chop per night, about $5. It felt too good to be true. "There is maintenance," he added, gesturing vaguely toward the ceiling. "Some floors not open. Bug gas." I assumed he meant fumigation. Seemed routine enough. He gave me a room on the 4th floor, handed me a key attached to a carved teakwood block, and told me breakfast was served in the lobby between 7 and 9. I took the rusted elevator up, which shuddered as it climbed like it was trying to remember how to do its job. The 4th floor hallway was narrow, carpeted, and dimly lit with amber bulbs that flickered every so often. The air was dry and oddly sweet, like incense and stale paint. The room wasn't much. A single bed with a paper-thin mattress, a wall-mounted fan, a desk with a plastic chair, and a bathroom with a single exposed bulb and a drain that smelled like iron. But I didn't care. I stripped off my dusty shirt, washed my face, and passed out within minutes of hitting the pillow. I slept like a corpse. Next morning, I made my way down to the lobby around 8 o'clock. The breakfast was simple. Rice porridge, sliced papaya, some hard-boiled eggs, and a tin pot of bitter black coffee. A few other travelers were scattered around the dining area. 2 German guys in their 20s, a middle-aged Australian couple, and a solo woman with a hiking backpack covered in country flags. I sat near the Germans. They looked exhausted. One of them had deep circles under his eyes and kept rubbing the bridge of his nose. I offered a polite, "Morning," and they nodded back. After a few minutes of eating in silence, one of them leaned over and asked, "You hear anything weird last night?" I shook my head. "No. Slept like a rock." He looked at his friend and then back to me. "They moved us. Around 2 a.m. someone came knocking, told us we had to change rooms. Said it was a mistake. We weren't supposed to be on that floor." "Which floor were you on?" I asked. "5th. I paused. "What reason did they give?" He shrugged. "Didn't really say. Just that it wasn't safe." We laughed a little about it, chalked it up to disorganized hotel management, but I could tell it bothered them. The other guy hadn't touched his food. He just stared at his coffee, turning the cup slowly in his hands. Later that day, I ran into the Australian couple outside. They were smoking near the back of the building and told me they overheard something strange from the staff. Apparently, the hotel had been fumigating parts of the building for a bug infestation, cockroaches, maybe termites. They were using some kind of industrial gas, the kind that requires a full mask and ventilation afterward. That's why the top floors were closed. But according to what the Aussies overheard, the 5th floor wasn't supposed to have anyone booked at all. It had been accidentally listed in the system as open, and the Germans had been checked in there by mistake. The staff only realized the error midway through the night, when the extermination crew began sealing rooms and pumping the gas and through hose nozzles slipped under each door. Apparently, it wasn't until someone on the maintenance team noticed bags and shoes inside one of the rooms that the alarm was raised, and the guests evacuated just in time. They'd already gassed the 2 rooms next to the Germans. No one answered the knocks. I don't know if there was anyone in those rooms. No one would say. I remember walking back up to my floor slowly this time. I studied every door I passed. I noticed long, shallow scratches at the base of one room, like something had been shoved under the door hard and dragged back out. There was a faint smell in the air, chemical, sharp, and artificial. I hadn't noticed it the night before. I couldn't stop thinking about how easy it would have been for me to have been booked on that floor. No big conspiracy. No ghosts or monsters. Just a clerical mistake and a lack of communication. And I keep thinking about how casually the hotel staff explained it. Like it was just another logistical error. Like guests nearly being gassed to death was on par with a late checkout. I checked out that evening. Didn't wait for breakfast. And ever since then, whenever I travel, no matter how tired I am, how cheap the rate, or how friendly the staff seem, I always ask one specific question at check-in. Are you sure this room is safe? And I pay attention to how long they take to answer. I've stayed in a lot of places over the years. Cheap hostels, fancy city hotels, roadside motels with flickering neon signs and carpets that smelled like damp shoes. But this one really stuck with me. Not because it was rundown or creepy in the usual sense. In fact, it was the opposite. It was one of those picturesque countryside bed and breakfasts. Old brickwork, flowering vines up the side of the building, wooden beams so low in the hallway you had to duck. It looked like something off a postcard. My friend Mason and I had been on a road trip through the north of England, and we stumbled on it by accident while driving through a small village called Holmes Hollow. We'd originally planned to camp that night, but the weather had other plans. Gray clouds had been chasing us all afternoon, and when the rain finally hit, it came down hard, thick and cold, hammering the windshields so loudly we had to raise our voices to talk. We pulled into the gravel drive just after 6. I remember the crunch under the tires, the wet sound of the wipers squeaking across the glass. The sign was carved wood, faded from the weather, hanging by one chain. It simply read, Rosemary Lodge, EST 1889. Mason joked that it looked haunted. I laughed at the time. Inside, it was cozy, almost unnaturally so. The kind of warmth that feels engineered, like every cushion, every doily, every soft light bulb had been placed with absolute intention. It smelled faintly of cinnamon and old wood. There were teacups on every shelf, lace curtains, and a grandfather clock that ticked in slow, deliberate beats. I noticed it didn't chime on the hour, which seemed odd. But I didn't say anything then. The woman who ran the place was named Margaret. She looked to be in her late 60s, white blouse buttoned up to the neck, floor-length skirt, hair pinned up tight. She was polite, soft-spoken, and had this way of smiling that never quite reached her eyes. They were a pale blue, almost milky. Sharp, though, like they were constantly taking inventory of you. She welcomed us like she'd been expecting us. Room 3's just at the top of the stairs. I've made up the beds fresh this morning, she said. We hadn't called ahead. No booking. No mention of us coming. But maybe she just said that to everyone. Or maybe we weren't the only ones who came in out of the rain. The room was nicer than I expected. 2 twin beds with heavy quilts, a small vanity mirror, a reading chair by the window. It overlooked a walled garden, neat hedges, a stone bird bath. For a while, everything was fine. We showered, unpacked, then headed downstairs to the sitting room. There was a fire already going in the hearth, soft orange glow licking at the logs, casting shadows up the stone walls. Mason and I were talking about the route for the next day. I was mid-sentence, I swear, when I looked up and saw her. Margaret. She was standing in the room with us. No hello. No footsteps on the wooden floor. No sound at all. Just suddenly there. Right behind the reading chair. My heart jumped a little. I even glanced at Mason, thinking maybe he noticed it too. He did this tight little smile, the kind you do when something weird happens in public and you don't want to be rude. "Didn't hear you come in," he said. She just smiled. "I hope the fire's warm enough. There's tea in the kitchen if you like. Help yourselves." Then she turned and walked out. I watched her go. Her footsteps made no sound, even on the floorboards. Just a faint swish of fabric. We joked about it afterward, said she must have come in through another door. But the room had only one entrance. No side hallway. No connecting rooms. Later that night, we noticed something else. We were lying in our beds, lights out, but still talking quietly. One of those half-silly, half-serious conversations you have before sleep when you're out of town, about what you'd do if you inherited a haunted house, or what animal you'd want watching your back during an apocalypse. I mentioned something personal, something I hadn't told anyone in years. It wasn't a big deal, but it was private. Something about my dad, how he used to talk in his sleep. I remember Mason paused, then laughed, said something back. We moved on. The next morning, Margaret brought us toast, eggs, and black pudding. She poured the tea without asking. And right as she set my cup down, she said, "My husband used to talk in his sleep. Drove me mad for 23 years. He'd even talk about things he'd never say while awake." It wasn't the words themselves. It was how she said it. Like she knew what I'd said the night before. Like she'd been there. I didn't respond. I just stared at her for a moment. Mason noticed. He went quiet too. After breakfast, we wandered around the garden for a bit. Tried to shake the weirdness off. But it clung to us, like that damp air after a storm. I kept looking at the windows, wondering if she was watching us from behind the curtains. That night it got worse. I woke up around 3 a.m. The room was silent. No wind, no distant cars, not even the creak of the old house settling. Just this thick, heavy stillness. Then I heard the door handle. Not creaking. Not knocking. Turning. Slow, careful, deliberate. I sat up in bed, heart thudding. I could see the silhouette of the door and the moonlight coming through the window. The handle moved again, downward this time, then let go. I whispered Mason's name. He stirred, sat up groggily. "You heard that?" I asked. He nodded. Quietly got up and walked to the door. He pressed his ear against it. Nothing. He opened it fast. The hallway was empty. The lights were off. We stood there a moment, listening. Then we heard footsteps, faint, retreating down the stairs. Not hurried. Just steady. Almost unbothered. We barely slept after that. When morning came, we packed up before breakfast. Margaret met us at the bottom of the stairs. She was holding a fresh pot of tea and smiled like everything was normal. "Heading off already?" she asked. "Yeah. Early start," Mason mumbled. "Well, you boys have a safe journey," she said. Then added, almost as an afterthought, "You left the door unlocked last night. Not very safe, is it?" We didn't answer. We just nodded, thanked her, and left. As we drove off, I looked back once. She was still standing in the doorway, hands folded in front of her. That same smile. Watching us. Like she knew something we didn't. To this day, I still don't know how she moved around the house like that without a sound. I don't know how she always seemed to appear just behind us. I don't know how she knew things we never told her. And I don't know who tried to open our door that night, or why. But I know I will never, ever stay in another countryside B&B again. I'd been on the road for nearly 18 hours by the time I arrived at the hotel. It started early that morning in Ankara. I was supposed to be on a budget photography trip, tracing the old coastal villages of southwest Turkey, away from the usual tourist crowds. My plan was to end up in a sleepy fishing town called Kavaskoy, a small dot on the map between Fethi and Marmaris. The kind of place you wouldn't find unless someone pointed it out with a shaky finger and said, "Ah, yes, very quiet, very beautiful." The problem was, getting there was like threading a needle in a thunderstorm. My flight out of Ankara was delayed by 4 hours. The connecting bus ride broke down outside Mugla, and I had to cram into a hot, rust-covered minibus with a broken ceiling fan and 2 chickens in the back. By the time I reached the coastal highway south of Marmaris, the sun had long since disappeared. All I had was a crumpled printout of a hotel confirmation, a dying phone, and a vague idea that the place was tucked somewhere into the cliffs above the water. None of the taxi drivers at the bus terminal spoke English. When I pointed at the address and tried to pronounce Hotel Denizkaya, one of them squinted at the paper, muttered something to another man in Turkish, and scratched his head. Another driver just laughed. Eventually, an older man in a brown leather cap motioned for me to follow. I climbed into the back seat of his dusty white Fiat, not entirely confident I wasn't about to be kidnapped. But at that point, I didn't care. I was so drained I could have slept standing up. We drove in silence, following the coastal road for what felt like forever. The headlights lit up patches of sharp-angled rocks and thick olive trees. Every once in a while, we'd pass abandoned roadside buildings, their windows dark and empty. My eyes started to droop. I felt the road curve left and right, the smell of sea air drifting faintly through a cracked window. Then we turned down a steep gravel path that led toward the cliffs. The road narrowed into what barely passed as a driveway. There were no signs. No lights. Just the outline of a 3-story building sitting crookedly on the edge of the sea. And that's when I saw it. Flames. Thin tongues of fire curled up along the far end of the building, orange against the night, licking the side of the structure like fingers tapping on glass. Smoke hung low around the roof, swirling upward in waves. My breath caught in my throat. I leaned forward and tapped the driver's shoulder. "Hey, this is the place?" The man just nodded. "Denizkaya," he said, waving toward the building like he was pointing at a cafe with good pastries, not a little fire. Before I could say anything, the front door burst open and a man in a crisp white button-down came jogging out. He had to be in his mid-60s, short and balding, but with an oddly energetic step. His sleeves were rolled up, and his face was flushed, not panicked, not alarmed. Just pleased. He opened my door before I could react. "You come. Very good. We've been waiting." I blinked at him. Is the hotel on fire?" He glanced behind him casually, then shrugged like I had pointed out a leaky faucet. Small fire. No problem. You come. I have very nice room for you." Now, if I'd been well rested or even half alert, I probably would have refused. But I wasn't. I was bone-tired, foggy-brained, and a little nauseous from the winding road. I stepped out of the cab, my boots crunching on the gravel, and followed him inside without another word. The smell hit me first. Burnt wood and something chemical, like melted plastic. Inside, the front lobby was surprisingly clean. A long mahogany desk stood at one end, and a chandelier, actually a real one, hung above a glossy marble floor. Smoke drifted along the ceiling in wisps. There were voices shouting in Turkish somewhere above us, followed by the clatter of boots and metal. I stepped to the side as 2 firefighters jogged past with a long orange hose. The man, who never introduced himself, just smiled and kept walking. "Second floor. Best room in house," he called over his shoulder, waving me toward the stairs. I hesitated only briefly before following, half tripping on the polished steps. The staircase was beautiful. Ornate wrought iron rails with curling vines, the kind of old-fashioned decor you'd find in a Mediterranean villa. Smoke trailed up from the other wing of the hotel, but our side looked untouched. At the second-floor landing, the man stopped and turned to me, beaming. "You see? Fire only over there. This side, no fire. Very safe." He waved a hand toward a hallway bathed in soft yellow light. The carpet was a little worn, but the walls were clean. It looked fine. Too fine, honestly. My brain wanted to scream, "What the hell are you doing?" but exhaustion had made me stupid. I nodded dumbly and let him unlock the door to room 206. The room smelled faintly of lemon polish and salt. It had one window, overlooking the water. A king-size bed with a blue coverlet. A small wooden desk, a mirror, a worn leather chair in the corner. Everything felt too still, like the room hadn't been used in a long time. I glanced at the fire evacuation map on the back of the door. It showed a single hallway leading to a stairwell that connected directly to the burning wing. Not ideal. "Okay?" the man asked, watching me. Yeah, it's good," I muttered, setting my pack on the desk. "You sleep good," he said, clapping me on the shoulder before walking off without waiting for a reply. The door clicked shut behind him. I stood there for a long minute, listening to the distant muffled shouts outside, trying to make sense of the last 10 minutes. Then I sat on the bed, boots still on, and passed out fully clothed with the window open a crack. When I woke up, sunlight was bleeding in through the curtains. It took me a moment to remember where I was. Then I smelled the smoke. It wasn't strong, but it clung to everything, my clothes, the sheets, the carpet. I peeled myself off the bed and opened the door. The hallway was empty. The air felt heavy, like someone had been cooking electrical wires. I made my way back down the stairs, stopping halfway when I caught sight of the other side of the hotel. It was charred, completely blackened. Part of the roof had caved in, and the wallpaper peeled like burnt parchment. A section of the hallway had collapsed entirely. And I realized then, with a slow, crawling feeling in my chest, that the fire hadn't been small. It had torn through that wing like it was made of straw. How the entire place hadn't gone up, I still don't know. Downstairs, the man was sitting at a table near the kitchen with 2 cups of tea already poured. "You sleep well?" he asked, cheerful as ever. I nodded slowly, still staring past him at the scorched entryway. "You lucky," he said, raising his cup. "You get room on good side." We ate breakfast in silence. Bread, olives, a boiled egg. He never once mentioned the fire again. Neither did I. I checked out less than an hour later, walking a mile uphill to the main road before catching a ride with a local farmer heading north. I never saw the man again. I looked up the hotel a few weeks later, and it had been shut down. I don't know what still nags at me more, the fact that he was so calm, or the idea that if I had arrived 10 minutes later, I might have been given a room on the wrong side, and no one would have ever known I was there. I was passing through rural Pennsylvania on my way to visit an old college friend who lived near State College. It was a last-minute road trip, the kind where I didn't book much ahead, just relied on Google and a bit of instinct. I was alone and figured I'd make stops wherever seemed charming or quiet enough to crash for the night. I remember it was late October. Just cold enough that the air had that sharp bite when you stepped out of your car, and the trees were halfway bare, their remaining leaves the brittle, burnt orange kind that skitter across pavement like dry insects. Around dusk, after hours of meandering through 2-lane highways and farmland that bled into forests, I spotted a small roadside sign barely lit by a flickering sconce. It read, "Juniper Hollow B&B, vacancies available." The script was all curly and faded, painted onto a wooden board nailed between 2 leaning fence posts. I slowed down and turned in on a whim. The driveway was narrow gravel, wet from the earlier rain, and wound uphill through a patch of woods before opening onto a clearing where the house stood. It looked like something from a storybook. 2 stories, painted pale green, a white wraparound porch, soft yellow light glowing through gauzy curtains. There were flower boxes on the windows and wind chimes tinkling somewhere in the dark. My first thought was, this place is almost too quaint to be real. I knocked, and a tall, thin man in his 60s answered the door. He wore corduroy pants and a brown cardigan that looked like it had seen decades of use. His gray hair was slicked back with care, and he greeted me with an oddly stiff smile, like someone who had learned politeness from watching old movies, not from real life. "Evening," he said, his voice papery. "You just need a room for the night?" I nodded. "Yeah, just one night. Long drive. You have anything available?" He paused for half a beat too long before answering. "Certainly. Room 3B is free." The lobby, or more like the parlor, was cozy enough. Mismatched armchairs, a fireplace that had recently been used, faint smell of cedar smoke in the air. There was a wall full of antique dolls arranged behind a glass case. I didn't notice it right away, but once I did, I couldn't look away. Dozens of them, all porcelain, all wide-eyed and immaculately preserved. Some with cracked cheeks or faded dresses, some so perfect they almost looked new. The man noticed me staring and offered a smile. "My wife collects them," he said. "Used to. She passed." I offered a polite nod and quickly turned my eyes elsewhere. He gave me the key, an actual old brass key on a long tag, and told me that breakfast was served at 8 sharp in the sunroom. I asked if anyone else was staying that night, and he shook his head. "Quiet week," he said. "Just you." I made my way upstairs. The house creaked like old houses do, and the carpeting in the hallway was a rich maroon with golden floral patterns that curled and wove like ivy. It felt padded underfoot, like there were layers of something beneath it. Room 3B was at the far end of the hall. The room itself was modest. A small double bed with a worn quilt, a writing desk near the window, a little armchair, and a bookcase built into the wall across from the bed. The walls were painted this soft eggshell color, and the room smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. I dropped my bag and sat down on the edge of the bed, just kind of taking it in. Something about the quiet felt off. Not bad, just a little too quiet. I didn't hear a furnace, or distant traffic, or even crickets outside. Just the soft tick of the wall clock above the dresser. While checking the outlets for a phone charger, I noticed faint scratches in the floorboards in front of the bookcase. I brushed my fingers along the wood. They looked like drag marks. Subtle but noticeable. Curious, I stood and ran my hands along the edge of the bookcase, and sure enough, it moved slightly when I pushed. A few more shoves, and it swung open. Behind it was a narrow doorway. No secret tunnel or anything dramatic, just a dark little corridor about 5 feet long. At the end of it, a doorway, this one open, led into a cluttered office. Stacks of paperwork, a computer monitor glowing faintly in sleep mode, boxes piled high on the floor. Before I could process it fully, the man appeared behind me. I hadn't heard him come up. "Oh, you found it," he said softly, as if I'd uncovered a surprise he'd planted. I jumped slightly. "Sorry, I just saw the marks." I didn't mean to snoop. No. He interrupted, still smiling. "It's fine. This used to be a shared doorway when the place was a boarding house. I kept it out of convenience. I do a lot of my work in there." He stepped into the office and pointed to a heavy bolt lock on his side of the doorway. "I can lock it from here, of course," he said casually. "But not from your side. That one's flush. Just a solid panel on your end. That stuck with me. So, you can lock me out, but I can't lock you out?" He gave a small, dry laugh. "Oh, well, it's never been a problem." There was something in his tone I didn't like. Too dismissive. Too smooth. I nodded slowly and stepped back into my room. "Okay, thanks. I'll probably just keep this shut." "Of course," he said, still smiling. I closed the bookcase and stood there for a long moment, listening to his footsteps disappear down the hallway. Then I knelt down and inspected the edge again. The mechanism wasn't complex. It looked like the entire shelf was mounted on tracks. If he wanted to, he could slide it open quietly, even from his side. I spent the next half hour dragging the armchair and desk in front of the bookcase. Then I took a few items from my bag, some books, my boots, anything with weight, and stacked them around it. It was a clumsy barricade, but it made me feel better. The rest of the night, I barely slept. Every little creak of the house made me sit up. I stared at the shelf for what felt like hours, waiting for the books to tremble or the desk to shift. I kept the lamp on low. At one point, around 3 a.m., I thought I heard a faint scraping sound, like wood moving against wood, but I couldn't be sure. Maybe it was the house settling. Maybe it was my mind playing tricks on me. But I remember holding my breath for a long time. When morning came, I packed quickly. No breakfast. No pleasantries. I left the barricade in place and tiptoed out the door without making a sound. As I descended the stairs, the man was waiting in the lobby, standing next to the doll display. "Checking out already?" he asked, smiling again. "Yeah," I said. "Early meeting." He just nodded. I didn't ask any more questions. Didn't even look back. But I still think about that room. That secret door. That smile. And how easy it would have been for someone to come through that bookcase and never be seen again. I was 11 when my parents took us on a trip to Italy, a surprise vacation to make up for Dad's long work hours. As Mom put it, my little brother Liam and I didn't care much for the reason. We were just excited to be somewhere new, somewhere far away. And Rome felt like another planet compared to our small, beige neighborhood in Indiana. We stayed at this old, stone-clad hotel near the Trastevere district. The outside was covered in tangled vines and dark green shutters that creaked even without wind. The kind of place that looked haunted from the street but cozy on the inside. The lobby had these polished wooden beams and velvet couches that smelled like dusty cinnamon. And the best part, at least for me, was the indoor pool tucked away in the basement level. It wasn't flashy. No slides or jets or fountains. Just this long rectangle of glimmering blue water surrounded by gray stone walls and a row of narrow windows so high up you couldn't really see outside. The chlorine smell hit you before you even got to the stairs, sharp and chemical, but I didn't mind it. Something about that pool made me feel safe. Free even. Like it was mine. We arrived on a Tuesday, and by Wednesday morning I had already convinced my mom to let me go down there alone for a swim. "As long as you stay where I can see you," she said, even though she'd be lounging with her cappuccino on the poolside chair the whole time, pretending to read some book she'd brought but mostly scrolling through her phone. That day, the pool area was quiet. A few elderly couples in robes passed through, but none of them stayed long. Eventually, it was just me, doing handstands underwater, kicking off the walls, floating on my back in silence. The echo of my splashes bounced around the stone like I was inside a cavern. The air felt thick and humid, and the way the ceiling lights reflected off the water made everything shimmer in this unreal, dreamlike way. Then he showed up. I didn't hear him come in. Just suddenly noticed someone sitting at the edge of the pool where the stone met the water, ankles submerged, shirt neatly folded beside him on the tile. He looked to be in his late 30s or maybe 40, with a narrow face, receding hair, and thin-framed glasses that kept fogging up in the humidity. He wore black swim trunks and had a rolled-up newspaper next to him, unopened. I remember being confused because I hadn't seen him on the stairs, and there was only one way in. Still, I wasn't alarmed, at first. I gave him a polite nod like I was taught to do, and he smiled. Not a quick smile, but a slow, careful one. One of those expressions that feels studied, like he was watching to see how I'd react before deciding how far to take it. "Enjoying the water?" he asked. His voice was smooth, quiet, almost syrupy. It didn't match the sharpness of his eyes. I nodded and kicked softly to keep afloat. "Yeah," I said. "It's nice down here." He watched me swim a bit longer. I kept waiting for him to dive in, but he just stayed perched on the edge. At some point, I turned away to practice holding my breath underwater. When I popped up again, I nearly flinched. He'd moved. Now he was sitting a few feet closer, feet still in the pool, his arms resting on his knees. "You're good at that," he said. "How long can you stay under?" "I dunno," I muttered, brushing water from my face. 30 seconds, maybe." He nodded like that was impressive, like we were having some casual chat at a barbecue or something. But something about the way he was watching me, it wasn't friendly. It wasn't even neutral. His eyes kept scanning. Not just my face, but my arms, my legs, the way I moved in the water. "You're very graceful," he said, his voice dipping into something softer, almost like he was complimenting a painting. I didn't know what to say to that. I was a scrawny kid who barely weighed 80 pounds, and no one had ever called me graceful before. I remember my stomach tensing, though I didn't understand why yet. Just some instinct, like a quiet alarm bell going off somewhere in the back of my brain. He dipped his fingers into the water, swirling them slowly. "Bet you're ticklish, huh?" I blinked. "What?" He smiled again, wider this time. "Your feet. Most swimmers are. You know, because of how often they're exposed." He reached forward, and before I could register what was happening, his hand brushed against my ankle. Lightly at first, then more firmly. His fingers grazed the bottom of my foot, and I jerked instinctively, slipping under the water. When I surfaced, coughing and wiping my eyes, he was laughing. Not loudly, but that weird kind of chuckle where the lips stay shut and only the eyes crinkle. "See? Told you," he said. "Adorable." I glanced toward the lounge chairs. My mom was sitting with her back turned, talking to Liam, who was waving a juice box around in both hands. "Please don't," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "That's not funny." He reached again. This time I kicked, not hard but hard enough to splash water onto his lap. He paused, lips twitching. His expression wasn't angry, but it wasn't amused anymore either. It was flat. Studying. "I just think you're fun," he said, wiping his hands on his thighs. "No need to be so shy." He reached one more time, and I yelped, not loud enough to make a scene, but loud enough for my mom to hear. I guess she caught the movement too, because in the next second she was storming over in those awful hotel flip-flops that made smacking sounds against the stone. "Hey!" she snapped. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The man didn't look startled. He stood slowly, calmly, picking up his shirt and rolling it under his arm. "Just being friendly," he said. "Your son has a great sense of humor." "He's 12. My mom hissed. "Back the hell off." The man didn't argue. He just nodded and walked, no rush, no shame, toward the stairwell. I watched him disappear up the steps without even glancing back. We told the hotel manager, who offered some generic apology and promised to look into it. But we never got a name, and the cameras, according to them, hadn't been working that day. My mom didn't sleep that night. Neither did I. We didn't go back to the pool again, and we cut the vacation short 2 days later. For years I tried to write it off. Maybe he was just weird. Maybe he didn't mean anything by it. But I remember how his voice dipped when he called me adorable. I remember how his fingers lingered, how he didn't flinch when my mom confronted him. It was like he knew no one would do anything. And he was right. Now that I'm older, I understand what that man really was. And I still wonder, what would have happened if my mom hadn't turned around? I've always been a city person. The kind who measures life in traffic lights, crosswalks, and take out receipts. So when my girlfriend Anna suggested we backpack through southern Mexico, I said yes, mostly out of curiosity, and maybe to impress her, too. She's the more adventurous one between us. The kind who thinks sleeping in a jungle hut with no plumbing or power is grounding. I thought it sounded romantic in theory. In practice, it was something else entirely. It was in late September, the tail end of the rainy season. We'd been traveling for a week already, mostly hopping between beach towns and forest trails, and somehow we ended up in this tiny village near the edge of the Yucatan jungle. I don't remember the name, something long and unpronounceable, but I do remember the way the air changed as we arrived. It was heavier, almost soupy. The kind of humidity that makes your shirt cling to your back within minutes, even when you're just standing still. We arrived by Colectivo, a beat-up white van with no air conditioning, packed with locals and the occasional tourist. It dropped us at a dusty junction off a road barely wide enough for 2 bikes to pass. From there, we followed a narrow footpath through thick trees. The jungle was alive with sound, buzzing, chirping, clicking. Some sounds I could place, cicadas, frogs maybe. Others I couldn't. Every so often, something would scurry through the underbrush, and I'd instinctively grip Anna's hand tighter. The hut we'd rented for the night sat on stilts just above a clearing. It looked rustic, almost cartoonishly so, like something out of an adventure novel. Wooden walls, a thatched roof, and a single bed in the center with a mosquito net hanging above it like a ghostly veil. No outlets. No lights. Not even a fan. The man who showed us and didn't speak much English, but he smiled politely and pointed toward a small outhouse about 50 feet from the hut. He handed us a jug of water for washing and gestured toward the sky, saying, "Lluvia viene," before heading off. Rain is coming. We spent the afternoon exploring a cenote nearby, one of those natural sinkholes filled with fresh water. It was beautiful. The water was clear and cold, a welcome contrast to the sticky heat, and vines hung like ropes from the limestone walls. I remember the way the echo bounced off the cave when Anna laughed, and how it smelled faintly of wet earth and minerals. I almost forgot we were miles from civilization. But then the rain did come. It started gently, just a few scattered drops tapping against the leaves. But within minutes, it turned violent. We barely made it back to the hut before it came down in sheets, hammering the roof like fists. Thunder cracked in the distance, and lightning lit up the jungle in eerie, brief flashes. The air inside the hut turned muggy and close, like being wrapped in damp fabric. We changed into dry clothes and sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the storm. At first, it was kind of nice. Cozy even. We lit a citronella candle and talked in low voices. The net above the bed swayed slightly from the wind sneaking in through the gaps in the wall. I noticed that the net had some small holes, more like tears, really, but I didn't think much of it. Eventually, Anna drifted off, curled up with her arm over her eyes. I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, which was barely visible in the candlelight. The storm had passed by then, leaving behind only the sound of dripping water and the constant hum of insect life. That's when the unease crept in. It was subtle at first. A faint rustle, then silence. Then again, like something brushing against the walls. I sat up, listening. Could have been a lizard, maybe a rat. The jungle's full of things. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The hut was too quiet in between the sounds, like it was holding its breath. I reached for my phone and switched on the flashlight. I told myself I just wanted to check for mosquitoes or maybe see if one of our bags had fallen over. Nothing serious. The light cut through the darkness, revealing the wood-paneled walls, our backpacks near the door, the jug of water on the corner table. Then I tilted the light upward, and I saw them. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. The ceiling looked wrong, like it was moving, shifting slightly in the beam. I leaned closer, squinting. That's when the light caught the glint of legs. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Spiders. Large, slow-moving ones. Hairy. Their bodies casting small, bloated shadows against the ceiling beams. They were clustered near the corners, hanging still. Some of them crawled along the walls, legs tapping softly on the wood. One of them was inches from where my head had been just moments before. Its body was the size of my palm. I didn't yell. I didn't move. I just sat there, frozen, holding the phone like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. I nudged Anna. She stirred slightly. What? Don't freak out, I whispered, which is always a terrible way to start a sentence. But there are spiders. A lot of them. She sat up groggily. I aimed the light away so she wouldn't see the ceiling just yet. I didn't want to set her off. But then she looked up on her own. She didn't scream, but her entire body went rigid. Oh my God, she whispered. I stood and started checking the floor, the walls, the corners. Every step made my skin crawl. There was no way out that didn't take us through more webs, more crawling things. The candle had burned out by then. The hut felt like a box of nightmares. We ended up wrapping ourselves in every piece of clothing we had, scarves, towels, long sleeves, socks over our hands. I even used a pair of boxer briefs as a makeshift head covering. Anything to put distance between us and those things. Then we climbed back under the torn mosquito net, tucking the holes with whatever we could find, like scared kids hiding from a storm. We didn't sleep. Not really. I lay there with one eye open, holding my phone in my fist until the battery died, listening to the soft clicks and skittering sounds above us. At one point, I felt something brush my ankle under the blanket. I didn't look. I just pulled my legs in and stayed completely still. By morning, the rain had cleared, and the air was cool and oddly serene. Sunlight filtered through the slats in the walls, and the spiders were mostly gone, retreated back to whatever crevices they'd crawled out from. But the memory of that night clung to me like damp clothes. We left as quickly as we could. Didn't even say goodbye to the host. I didn't feel angry, not exactly. It's the jungle. These things live there. But that night taught me a hard truth. You can't ever really know how far your fear goes until it's pressed up against your skin, 8 legs at a time. Even now, back in the comfort of my apartment, sometimes I'll catch myself scanning the corners of the ceiling before going to bed. Just in case. Just to make sure they didn't follow. I don't usually talk about this trip. Even years later, it still sits in a strange, quiet part of my memory, like a wound that's scarred over without healing properly. It was the summer of '98. I was 5, maybe a little younger, and my family, my parents, 2 sisters, and I, were on a road trip through Northern California. My dad had this idea that we should unplug for a week and see nature, real nature, the kind that doesn't hum with power lines or glow from convenience store signs. So Yosemite was the plan. He mapped everything out on paper weeks ahead of time. He was always like that, careful, old school, a little too trusting of brochures and printed schedules. The drive from our home in Sacramento to the national park was supposed to be 4 hours. But we were a car full of kids, and nothing with kids ever moves in a straight line. Between bathroom stops, snack fights, car sickness, and a flat tire outside some nameless town that had a single gas station with no attendant, it was well past nightfall by the time we made it into the mountains. The last hour of the drive felt like something out of a dream. Those kind of back roads that twist and turn endlessly, where your headlights are the only thing breaking up the wall of darkness on either side. I remember my mom sitting rigid in the passenger seat, arms crossed, her eyes scanning the trees. Occasionally she'd mutter something to my dad under her breath. I didn't hear what she said, but I remember the tone, low, sharp, like she was trying not to worry us. I also remember her hands. She held mine the entire time from the moment we left the gas station. Her grip was warm but tight, too tight for comfort. We're almost there, Dad said, tapping the steering wheel, forcing a cheerfulness into his voice. The lodge should be right up ahead. When we finally pulled into the place, Cedar Hills Lodge, or something like that, I was almost asleep, slumped against the window. The parking lot was nearly empty. A few cars scattered along the edge, the building itself only half lit. It looked more like a long, low block of apartments than a hotel. There were no flowers out front, no signs of life at all, really. Just a single flickering porch light and a moth the size of a mouse thudding into it over and over again. I remember my mom's reaction the second the car stopped. She didn't open the door. She just sat there staring through the windshield like something on the building had caught her eye. "I don't like it," she said finally. Quiet but firm. My dad sighed. "Han, we're all exhausted. Just one night, all right? Tomorrow morning we'll find something else." She didn't respond right away, and I saw her rub her palms slowly across the inside of her wrist, a nervous habit she always had when something was wrong. Then she nodded once, very slightly. Just one night. The lobby smelled like mildew and artificial pine cleaner. There was no music, no television murmuring in the background, just a humming soda machine and the occasional distant click of some appliance cycling on. The man at the front desk barely looked up when we came in. He had gray hair, not old but thinning in that way that made him seem tired, and he moved slow, like every step took thought. No smile, no greeting, just a set of keys dropped onto the counter with a dull clink. Room 207. As we walked to the room, I remember my mom making us hold hands again. Not just crossing the lot, inside too. She wouldn't let us walk ahead or linger. Even when my little sister bent down to tie her shoe, my mom just scooped her up and kept walking. Our room was on the second floor, halfway down the corridor. The hallway lights were dim and flickering, and the carpet had a weird crunch to it, like it was always slightly wet. When my dad opened the door, something about the room felt off. Not dirty, not dangerous. Just wrong. Like it had been cleaned too hard. As if someone tried to erase something but didn't quite get everything. The beds were stiff and perfectly made. The curtains didn't move at all when the window was opened. Even the air smelled stale, like someone had sprayed lemon cleaner to cover something up. My mom made us sit on the beds while she checked the bathroom and closets. She even pulled back the shower curtain and stood there for a few seconds before closing it again. Her face was unreadable, but her shoulders were stiff and square. Later, when we were settling in, my dad tried to lighten the mood. "Why don't we all go check out the pool?" he said. "Stretch our legs a bit. Kids, grab your swimsuits." I remember thinking it was a little weird to go swimming that late, but I was 5. Swimming was swimming. The pool was down behind the main office, half covered in shadows from a big, broken sign that used to light up. Now it was just cracked plastic and a couple of exposed wires. The pool itself looked clean enough, though. Water a little too still, too clear. We got in. I floated near the shallow end while my sisters splashed each other. My dad leaned against a chair, soaking his feet, and my mom sat on the edge with her arms crossed tight. We were only in the water maybe 10 minutes before she realized there were no towels. She stood up, hesitant, and walked back toward the lobby with this weird expression, half angry, half uncertain. When she came back, she looked different. Pale. Tight-jawed. She was holding 2 thin towels but didn't hand them out. "Out." "No," she said. Her voice was low and flat. We didn't ask questions. She had that tone, one we knew not to argue with. We scrambled out of the water. My dad raised an eyebrow but didn't press her. Back in the room, she pushed the dresser in front of the door. My dad made a joke about her watching too many crime shows, but she didn't laugh. Instead, she made us all sleep in the same bed, pulling the second mattress off the other bed to the floor and layering the covers. She didn't sleep. I know because I woke up a few times that night, and every time, I saw her sitting upright, eyes on the door. We left at dawn. No breakfast, no coffee. She packed in silence while we put our shoes on. My dad didn't say much either. It was like even he felt something had been off, even if he didn't want to admit it. It wasn't until 2 months later that we learned what that place was. I was in the living room, playing with a flashlight, when I heard my mom call my dad from the kitchen. Her voice shook. "Turn on the TV." I watched them stand frozen in front of the screen. There was a photo, some man with cold, flat eyes and a weird little smile. They said he'd murdered 3 women and a child near Yosemite. They showed the motel. It was the same one. I recognized the peeling paint and the cracked sign. My mom's face went pale as paper. She whispered, "That was him." "The towels," she added. "He brought the towels." I didn't fully understand what happened until years later, but I still remember how she looked that day. I've never seen my mother scared like that, quietly scared, the kind that sinks deep and never really leaves. We never went back to Yosemite. And to this day, I've never seen her doubt her gut again. When she says, "Something's wrong," we listen. Even now, sometimes when I check into a hotel, I'll pause at the threshold and just feel the room. It's nothing supernatural, just a learned habit. Because sometimes, the place isn't haunted, but it still holds something dark. And if you're lucky, you leave before you find out what it is. I hadn't taken a proper vacation in almost 3 years. Work had consumed me. That typical 9 to 5 had stretched into something closer to 9 to never. I finally burned out so hard that even my manager told me to go away for a while. So I did. I packed light, chose a quiet coastal town I'd never heard of before, Grand Mere, and booked a room at a small hotel that looked clean and affordable. A brick building, 3 stories tall, right near the shore. Nothing flashy. Just simple, quiet, and far from the city. It was exactly what I needed. The drive there was oddly relaxing. Long stretches of 2-lane highway, farms on either side, the occasional cluster of wild sunflowers or an old, leaning barn swallowed by weeds. I had the windows down, music low, warm air curling around my arms as I passed rust-colored fields and distant wind turbines turning lazily in the breeze. Grand Mere wasn't on any map I'd seen, but my GPS led me there easily enough. One main street. A diner. A convenience store. A post office that looked like it hadn't processed mail since the 90s. Everything had that faded, salt-worn feel to it, like time passed more slowly there, or had given up altogether. The hotel, the Sandpine Lodge, sat just a block from the water. White and tan siding, paint peeling in places, and a small wooden sign out front that rocked in the wind with a quiet creak. The front desk was staffed by a man in his late 40s named Rick, who greeted me with a polite nod and barely any eye contact. The lobby smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old carpet. The kind of smell that makes you vaguely nostalgic for nothing in particular. "You're in 210, he said, sliding over the keycard. "Back staircases to your right. Elevators out." That was fine. I liked taking the stairs anyway. Room 210 was just as advertised. Beige walls, generic framed beach art, a small TV mounted too high on the wall, and a bed that sagged slightly in the middle. But it was clean. Mostly quiet. You could hear the distant hum of the ocean if you cracked the window, along with the occasional seagull or rumble of a passing car. I unpacked, changed into more comfortable clothes, and by sundown, I was lying across the bed in near total silence. It was perfect. But then, the night started. The first time it happened, I was asleep. Deep asleep. At first, it worked its way into my dreams, this subtle clicking sound. Something repetitive. I woke slowly, not jolted, just disoriented. The room was dark, but my phone said it was around 2:13 a.m. That same soft clicking repeated again. I held my breath. It was the doorknob. A faint, rapid jiggling, like someone was trying to open it in a hurry. Not just a bump or brush, but purposeful. Panicked. I sat up straight and stared at the door, which was only 5 feet away from the bed. My heart was thudding now. I waited, trying to make sense of it. Then, just like that, it stopped. Silence. I stayed frozen for a minute. Listened harder. I checked the hallway through the peephole. Empty. I convinced myself maybe someone drunk had confused my door with theirs. It was a hotel, after all. That stuff happens. I double-checked the deadbolt and latch, then crawled back into bed. But it happened again the next night. Same time. Around 2 in the morning. I was asleep, and again woke up to that same frenzied jiggling. This time, it was louder. More desperate. I stared at the door, this sick feeling swelling in my stomach. The handle jerked sharply once, twice, then silence. When I looked again through the peephole, the hallway was still empty. But I noticed something strange this time. A faint smear on the white painted door frame, just under the handle. I ran my thumb across it. It was greasy. I went down to the front desk the next morning, trying to act casual about it. Rick was there again, typing slowly on an old desktop computer. "Hey," I said. "Quick question. Anyone report, people messing around with the doors at night?" He barely looked up. "Not that I've heard." "Why?" I hesitated. "Well, both nights I've been here, I've woken up to someone trying to open my door. Like, forcefully. Middle of the night." Rick blinked. paused, then said, "You sure you didn't dream it?" "Pretty sure. Both nights at 2 a.m. Not exactly my idea of a fun dream." He looked at me a moment longer, then leaned back in his chair with a sigh. "Look," he said, "I'll level with you. There's a guy who stays here off and on. Local family. Big donors in town. His parents pay for him to stay here when he's not somewhere else." "Somewhere else?" Rick scratched at the corner of his mouth. "He's supposed to be in a residential program. Mental health stuff. But sometimes he checks out early." "They let him out?" "We don't always get a heads up." I stared at him. "And you let him stay here?" "It's complicated. His family has money. They've been here forever. The kind of people who can get places shut down. I keep him on the 3rd floor when he shows up. Room 312. If he starts sleepwalking, well," he trailed off, "just make sure you use the latch." I left the lobby in a daze. I didn't know what to make of it. A sleepwalker? Really? But the way Rick had said it, if he starts sleepwalking, didn't sit right with me. Like it was a common enough problem that they just sort of shrugged it off. That night, I pushed a chair under the doorknob before bed. At 2:07 a.m., I woke again. This time, it wasn't just the handle. There was a sharp, heavy thud, a dull smack against the door like someone had thrown their shoulder into it. I sat upright, heart hammering in my chest. The chair under the knob creaked slightly. Another thud. Louder. The sound of breathing now, shallow, rapid. Then another jiggling of the handle, violent and fast, like whoever was on the other side was panicking. Then, whispering. I couldn't make out the words at first. But they weren't in a normal tone. Just this raspy muttering, like someone talking to themselves through gritted teeth. I crept toward the door, crouched low, and pressed my ear to the wood. "Let me in," a voice said, barely above a breath. "They locked me in again." "Why would they lock me in?" I jumped back so fast I tripped over my own foot and hit the dresser behind me. When I got up to look through the peephole, there was no one there. Just that dead, motionless hallway again, lit in weak yellow light. I left the hotel the next morning. Checked out early. No refund. I try not to overthink it. Maybe Rick was right. Maybe it was a guy off his meds. Maybe he didn't know what he was doing. But I couldn't stop thinking about that voice. How calm it sounded in its desperation. How it whispered like it knew someone was listening. The worst part? On the back of my door, behind the chair I'd wedged under the knob, was a set of fingerprints. Long, smeared streaks. As if someone had run their hands down the door again and again. Even now, I think about that voice sometimes. The way it said, "Let me in," like it was rehearsed. Like it had said it 1,000 times before. And I wonder how many doors he's knocked on since. I travel a lot for work. Not the glamorous kind of travel with champagne in first class or sightseeing between meetings. I mean the real grind. Hotel rooms that all start to feel the same. Cheap takeout eaten from the desk. Blackout curtains pulled against whatever time zone I'm supposed to be in. Most years, I'm on the road more than 250 days. I've been in dozens of hotels, from chains off the highway in dusty towns to nicer places downtown. So trust me when I say, I'm not easily rattled by a room. This happened last October in Montgomery, Alabama. I just wrapped up a consulting job in Jackson and had a few days off before the next gig. I decided to book myself into a hotel I'd heard good things about. It wasn't 5-star or anything, but it was a newer Hyatt with decent reviews, the kind of place with polished fake marble floors and that faint industrial lemon cleaner smell that seems to cling to everything in hotels like it. I checked in late on a Sunday night, around 9:30 p.m. I remember because the lobby was empty and the woman at the front desk gave me this overly rehearsed "Welcome to the Hyatt" spiel that sounded like she was halfway through a yawn. I didn't mind. I just wanted a shower and some sleep. The room was clean. Beige walls, crisp white bedding, abstract painting above the bed, something that looked like it was made by someone who hated shapes. The AC unit was one of those boxed-in types under the window, humming softly, spitting out cool, dry air. There was that faint, stuffy hotel room smell, like someone else had been there 100 times before me, and the scent of them never quite left. I turned on the TV just to have some noise and lay on the bed flipping through the channels. Eventually, I passed out with the light from the screen flickering across the room. I woke up at 2:13 a.m. to the sound of a scream. Not a startled yelp. I'm talking a scream that sounded like it had been ripped from someone's chest. Raw, desperate. Not words, just noise. Like someone being dragged across pavement. Like pain had taken over and all that was left was this guttural howl of pure suffering. I shot up in bed, heart hammering, mouth suddenly dry. For a few seconds I didn't move, I just listened. Nothing. The air was still. The AC buzzed. I could hear the faint tick of the wall clock, and far away, maybe a car down the road. But no voices. No screaming. Not even footsteps. I waited another minute before sitting back. I reached for my phone, 2:15 a.m. now. I debated calling the front desk but hesitated. I'd had a weird dream once before where I thought someone was screaming outside my window, only to wake up and realize it was a TV playing in another room. Maybe this was something like that. Maybe the walls were thinner than I thought. Maybe I was just overtired. I didn't sleep well the rest of that night. The next day, I went out to grab some breakfast at a local diner. The kind of place with vinyl booths and waitresses who call you honey. I tried not to think about the scream. I figured if it was something serious, there'd be cops or ambulances around. But the lobby was quiet, nothing seemed out of place. I worked from the room that afternoon, doing some planning for my next project, then went for a walk just before sunset. The streets were quiet. I passed a couple walking their dog and a kid kicking a soccer ball around in a nearby lot. The weather had that crisp October feel, cooler than usual for Alabama, with a steady breeze that made leaves skitter across the sidewalk like little claws. Back in the room that night, I made myself a cup of tea and got into bed around 10:30. I left the bathroom light on, like I always do, and kept the TV volume low. I needed the noise. Silence in a hotel room always feels like it's waiting for something. I drifted off eventually. This time I woke up at exactly 3:04 a.m. I can't explain what pulled me out of sleep. There was no sound. No sudden movement. Just a feeling. That kind of cold intuition that something is not right. That you're being watched. It was pitch dark, except for the soft yellow spill from the bathroom and the blinking red light on the smoke detector. I didn't move at first. I just lay there, trying to keep my breathing steady, eyes adjusting. That's when I saw him. There was someone sitting on the AC unit across the room. An old man. Late 70s, maybe older. Thin. Wiry, like he hadn't eaten properly in weeks. He was wearing a threadbare gray t-shirt and loose pajama pants that looked faded to almost white. His bare feet were planted on top of the vent, and his elbows rested on his knees like he'd been there a while. He was smoking. Not a cigarette from today. It looked like one of those hand-rolled kinds. The smoke drifted up slowly, curling into the dim air like a ghost trying to find its shape. But the worst part, he wasn't looking at me. He was staring at the wall. Just sitting there, like I didn't exist, as if he'd been doing this every night for years. I watched him in complete silence, my heart hammering so loud it felt like it would echo. After what felt like forever, he turned his head toward me. His face was deeply lined, hollow. Eyes slightly sunken, with a grayish tint to the whites. There was no anger in his expression, no recognition, just tiredness. A kind of worn-out resignation, like he wasn't even surprised I was there. I sat up straight in bed, instinct kicking in. Fight or flight. My voice caught in my throat, but I was ready to yell, to bolt for the hallway, and then he was gone. Just gone. The room was empty. There was no sound except the low hum of the AC. No smell of smoke. No indentation on the unit. Nothing. I stared at the space where he had been, my skin buzzing. I got up, turned every light on, checked the door, locked. Deadbolt still set. Checked the bathroom. The closet. Nothing. I didn't sleep after that. I stayed up watching TV with the lights on until the sun started coming through the curtains. I kept telling myself there had to be a rational explanation. Maybe I had a waking dream. Maybe I'd had some weird neurological blip. Sleep paralysis, a hypnopompic hallucination, whatever you want to call it. But I've had vivid dreams before. Never anything like that. Never so detailed, so tactile. I can still remember the shape of the man's knuckles, the way his foot tapped slightly on the plastic vent, the faint flicker of the smoke against the bathroom light. I thought about checking out early. But I didn't. I told myself it was stress, lack of sleep. I made it 2 more nights in that room without seeing anything again. But I never turned the lights off. And I never went near the AC unit. To this day, I can't explain it. And I've stayed in hundreds of hotel rooms since then. None of them ever felt quite the same.